something that a lot of people like don't really know how to do. So a lot of these things are very much like Goldilocks and Three Bears. You can either be too much of something like I was, too little of something like Francisco, or just right like Rocio. So hand and arm gesture, this also depends on the environment that you're in. If you're in a very large setting, then you're allowed to have a little bit more louder gestures. So something that's, a very large auditorium, then you should probably use a little bit more hand gestures, more arm gestures, so people can get the full effect even if they're sitting in the back row. But if you're talking to maybe 4 or 5 people in kind of a business setting, then it's something maybe you should limit your hand and arm gestures to maybe like an indoor voice kind of thing. With eye contact, it's important to maintain eye contact with your audience. Um, the proper length of eye contact would probably be the amount of time it takes to finish a thought. So for instance, I could go ahead and look at you and say something like, eye contact is very important for your presentation, and then move over to maybe you and say something like, so that way you need to, that's one way you can make sure that your audience is actually focused. So, but you don't want to have it too long or too short, that way the audience feels very uncomfortable. And you also don't want to move your head back and forth like a tennis match, or you don't want to be like a lighthouse and have the same pattern going back and forth. You want to kind of switch it up, have a little bit of variety in your eye contact. Facial expression, so there are 3 things that you should work with your facial expression, and that's one is having conversational facial expression. And second one is smiling appropriately, and the third one is interacting with your audience. And so this also kind of goes with the eye contact. Having a conversational facial expression, that's what feels natural to you in your presentation. So if you're having something a little bit more serious, then you should probably have that kind of facial expression. If you're having something a little bit more lighthearted or something, not quite as serious, then you can have a happier expression. Also, this is where it's important to smile appropriately. So if you're delivering bad news, it's probably not the best idea to be smiling as you tell someone, oh, by the way, we're going to cut all your funding. That's probably not a good idea. But if you're having something like, presenting the physical nonverbals, then I guess that's exciting. Then you can have a little bit more of a happier expression. Interacting with your audience, that's something that you can also kind of mirror the audience. If the audience is feeling very serious, then you should also kind of draw on that atmosphere, unless you're trying to persuade them otherwise. And then we also have the verbal and spatial. So verbal is kind of where how you are saying what you're saying. And spatial is the environment that you're in. So verbal, there's a couple of things that you should consider. It's the volume, rate, inflection, enunciation, and filler words. So with volume, it's also depending on the environment. If you're in a large setting, then it's important to speak a little bit louder so that everybody can hear you in the room. But if you're just in a classroom setting, or if you're just talking to 4 or 5 people, as long as the back row or the people furthest away from you is able to hear, then that is a good volume for you to be at. Rate and enunciation, those are important for your audience to be able to clearly understand your message. If you're
stood up because we knew it would be standing up during our presentation. And the last step is rehearse timing. You want to time this section, and you also want to have somebody sit in during your rehearsal so you know what sections need to be cut and what material should or shouldn't either be improved or cut. Next step we'll be talking about the three different types of presentations and how to prepare for them. So stand-up presentation. This is basically the type of presentation which we're giving you today, in which there's slides and we're standing up and the audience is sitting down. And the two steps that you need to use while preparing for it is ensuring link between the slides and the message. You want to practice introducing and building these slides so that way the flow is good and so that way your audience has time to grasp your message. We tend to speed up as we become more familiar with the material, but we have to remember that your audience is hearing audience information for the first time, so you want to make sure you give them time to fully understand what you're saying. And you also want to anticipate visual distractions. Uh, Slides can be an eye magnet by nature, so you want to make sure you keep eye contact with your audience and not the slides themselves. The second type of presentation is a deck presentation. This might be new to us since we're most familiar with stand-up presentation, but this is a more inflexible and interactive where you're sitting down and you're sitting down at a table and the presenter has access to a deck, which is essentially your entire slideshow. So the first step in this would be practicing your introduction. You want to tell your audience how the deck will be used, when to use it, and how it's going to be useful. You also want to consider nonverbals. As I mentioned, you'll be sitting down, so you want to avoid things like putting your elbow on the table, swiveling on the chair, and having your feet underneath the chair. The third type of presentation is the online presentation. The most important step in this is familiarizing yourself with the equipment. The last thing you want to have in the online presentation is a technical glitch because it hurts your credibility and something hard to recover from. So you want to make sure you have your camera angle set before time, and you also want to make sure that you have eye contact with the camera as opposed to the screen, which is a voice and body language. I'm sorry. Step. You also want to make sure that your sound is working properly, and as voice and body language is concerned, you want to make sure you're looking at the camera as to portray eye contact and not the screen. We tend to look at the screen since that's what we actually see the eye, but you have to remember that you're actually looking to the camera. So to portray eye contact, you want to look into the camera lens and not as opposed to the screen. Now we'll pass it on to Rosie to talk about managing the nervous system.
Thank you, Francisco. Now that we have learned about nonverbal symptoms and how to prepare presentations, how to focus on the presenter, and how we can manage the nervous system. Nervous, without a doubt, affects everybody, but there's general techniques that can be done to improve this. Starting to discover why or what makes you nervous. Is it the audience? Is it the setting? Maybe you forgot to brush your teeth this morning. You're feeling a little worried about your breath. Whatever the cause may be, figuring out that root and making a small change to make you feel more comfortable on stage can definitely improve your presentation. Next, find and list your symptoms. I know we all know exactly what we do on stage that show how nervous we are. And these symptoms can typically be visible, audible, or undetectable. Visible would be like the shaky hands a lot of us see on stage. Audible would be that quivering voice,